In the rolling hills of southern France, inside a forgotten cave called Grotte Mandrin, archaeologists made a mind-blowing discovery: the remains of a Neanderthal who didn't belong. This individual, nicknamed Thorin, came from a population so genetically distinct, it had been cut off from all other Neanderthals and humans for more than 50,000 years. How could a group of people survive in total isolation for so long? And what can this teach us about our own species? Let's dive into the story of the loneliest branch on the human family tree. In 2022, a team of researchers excavating Grotte Mandrin, a cave in the Rhone Valley of southern France, uncovered a single baby tooth. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. But when analyzed, it told a surprising story. This was no ordinary Neanderthal tooth. It belonged to a population that had been isolated for tens of thousands of years. The child, estimated to be around 2 years old at the time of death, lived roughly 120,000 years ago, and the tools found alongside the remains, they were unlike those used by neighboring groups. The researchers nicknamed this mysterious child Thorin, after the dwarf king from The Hobbit. Like the fictional Thorin, this real-life figure came from a hidden and insular world, largely unknown to the rest of humanity. But how do we know Thorin's people were truly isolated? Using advanced genetic analysis, scientists compared Thorin's DNA to other known Neanderthal groups across Europe and Asia. What they found was astonishing. Thorin's lineage didn't match any nearby populations. Instead, his DNA was so distinct, it suggested that his people had been genetically isolated for over 50,000 years. That means this group wasn't interbreeding with other Neanderthals, and certainly not with early modern humans. Imagine a family tree where one branch grows completely on its own, untouched by others for millennia. That was Thorin's people. Scientists believe a small band of Neanderthals settled in the Rhone Valley and remained there, cut off by geography, climate shifts, or perhaps other human populations. This level of isolation is virtually unheard of in human evolutionary history. It's as if time stood still for them, while the rest of the world moved on. So what kind of life did Thorin's people live, completely cut off from the rest of the world? Based on archaeological evidence, they were skilled hunters and tool makers. The tools found at Grotte Mandrin are unique, simpler in some ways, but highly adapted to the environment. These Neanderthals likely hunted wild game like deer and horses, gathered edible plants, and took shelter in the cave during harsh winters. They lived in small groups, possibly a few dozen individuals, just enough to sustain a population, but small enough to remain genetically isolated. But with isolation came challenges: limited genetic diversity, vulnerability to disease, and no access to innovations spreading through other human groups. Still, they endured for thousands of years. That tells us something powerful. Even in extreme isolation, human relatives could survive by relying on adaptability, social bonds, and deep knowledge of the land. Thorin's people weren't backward or primitive. They were survivors. So how did a population of Neanderthals become cut off for 50,000 years? The Rhone Valley, where Thorin was found, may have acted like a natural fortress. Surrounded by mountains and dense forests, it would have been hard to reach and even harder to leave. Add to that the extreme climate changes of the Ice Age, shifting rivers, and roaming predator populations. And you have a region that could easily become isolated. There's also the possibility that early modern humans moving into Europe unintentionally pushed certain Neanderthal groups into isolated pockets. Over time, these conditions may have created a cultural and genetic bubble, one that lasted for thousands of years. In a way, Thorin's people were living fossils, a living link to a much older version of the Neanderthal story. The discovery of Thorin and his people isn't just a cool footnote in prehistory. It rewrites part of the human story. Until now, scientists believed Neanderthals were more connected, constantly moving and interbreeding across regions. But this find proves there were hidden populations, genetic outliers, who stayed apart from the rest. It shows that Neanderthals were far more diverse than we imagined, with distinct cultures, tool-making styles, and ways of life. It also raises new questions. How many other isolated groups existed? What did we lose when they vanished? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what would the world look like today if they had survived? In the quiet darkness of Grotte Mandrin, a single tooth opened a window into a forgotten world. A world where a small group of Neanderthals lived, loved, and endured in total isolation for tens of thousands of years. They left behind no grand monuments, no sprawling cities, just traces in stone and bone, and a mystery that still echoes through time. Thorin's people remind us that human history isn't a straight line. It's a branching, tangled tree full of lost stories waiting to be uncovered. And every now and then, when we dig deep enough, we find a piece of ourselves buried in the silence. Because to understand who we are, we must never stop searching for who we were. If you enjoyed today's video, like and subscribe for more fascinating stories.